Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today to learn a little bit more about school improvement funds that will be available to your schools in the coming weeks. My name is Ruth Swanson, and I'm the Program Manager for District 180, which is the school improvement branch within the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support at KDE. Our primary goal today is really to equip you with the necessary information to assist you in completing the School Improvement Funds application. So upon the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be asked to complete a training verification form, just verifying your participation and attendance today. So please stay with us until the end of the training to be sure that you do receive that hyperlink. Also, hopefully you received all the materials ahead of time, and we do suggest that you take notes on your own slides and materials throughout this afternoon's trainings. I'm also joined by two of my colleagues, and I would ask that they introduce themselves to you as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Veronica Bowler. I am the TSI program consultant at KDE, and I'll be providing technical assistance with the application process, and I'll also serve as a reviewer of the applications once they're submitted to us at KDE.
And hello, my name is Natasha Stein, and I'm one of the assistant directors in the Division of School and Program Improvement, and I will also provide some support for this process as well.
So as you can see, we do have quite a few topics to cover as we share the SIF application process with you. So we've taken care of welcome and introductions. We will talk a little bit about the whole purpose behind this grant and the funds, and let you know about the different supporting roles that could be involved in the actual application process. We really see the School Improvement Funds application as a multi-layer process, and so we'll talk about the different responsibilities between school staff and district staff that will be involved. We will talk quite a bit about evidence-based practices, as that is a very important element to the application and really to your TSI improvement planning as well. We'll go over things related to allowability of certain resources. So those will need to be aligned to the evidence-based requirements. We'll talk about resources and expenditures being reasonable, allocable, necessary, and documented, which if you're familiar with Title I, you recognize those as the RAND criteria. We will also mention the funding matrix that goes along with these funds that just kind of gives you an idea of the types of budget codes that could be allowable within this particular application. There will be some different supporting documentation that will be involved in submission, so we'll talk about those and the whole submission process. We will let you know kind of the plan for awarding funds. We will definitely let you in on some of the timelines and deadlines of the process. And then we will throughout stop periodically to ask if there's any questions, but then we'll also leave some time at the end if there are any particular questions, as well as providing our contact information, because we know as this process moves along, you will definitely come up with different questions along the way. So Veronica is going to share a little bit more about the purpose of the funds and the different roles of staff who might be involved in the application process.
To start off, we want to acknowledge the purpose of school improvement funds and also discuss the various roles that stakeholders will have. These funds are provided for the TSI schools that participated in a two-day review this school year, the 2023-24 school year. So it's part of our responsibility at KDE, authorized under the ESSA Act, that we award funds to local educational agencies, which are the districts, to implement support and improved activities in those schools that are identified for targeted support and improvement, or TSI. School improvement funds require cooperation between several different role groups. So at the school level, there will be an electronic template used to initially fill out the application. We're going to dive into that template a little bit later, but it is important to note that this is not a job that's just for the principal or the administration team. This is not something for them to do alone. Various stakeholders should be involved in the process, including the school turnaround team. Everything is included on the electronic template at the school level, that will get entered into the grant management and planning system. This is commonly referred to as GMAP. I'm sure some of you have heard of that. So the district level staff is who's going to be entering that information into the GMAP system. Generally, the access to GMAP is only granted to district level staff, so that's why your assistance is needed there. Also, district level staff are responsible for completing some narrative questions, and they respond to a set of assurances. Those questions are only included in the GMAP system, so do not be alarmed that you're not seeing those on the electronic template. They will be in GMAP. After the district level approves the contents on the electronic template and then formally submits the application in GMAP, the SEA, which is us, KDE, will review and approve applications. We may also provide feedback on some items that need clarity or correction within the application before approval is granted. Once the application is approved, funds are awarded for use by the school. KDE also monitors federally funded grants to ensure legal compliance, so please know that that is a possibility. Okay, so this is just showing you all the official application welcome screen when you're looking for the application in GMAP. So we wanted to remind you all that while there is the electronic template that will be passed back and forth between the district and the school, we at KDE only officially review and approve what's in GMAP. So for any district level folks on here today, this is a screenshot of what you can expect to see in GMAP. Please note that the application is not currently live for Cohort 6, but we wanted to give you an idea of what to expect when you are searching through that drop-down menu in GMAP. When the application is live, we're going to let you all know via email. In the meantime, please know that you, our district level support responsible for transferring the information into GMAP, will select 2025 for the fiscal year, and then the name of this grant, which will be School Improvement Funds Cohort 6, and it will be listed beneath the Cohort 5 option that you see there that's currently available. This is going to tell you all a little bit more about the school level responsibilities. Again, like I was saying, the TSI principals or school level staff don't typically have that access to GMAP, so that's why we have the template that the schools work on that you'll pass off to the district, and then they will enter into GMAP. The template is only a stepping stone to that official application. We will not see that at KDE. The template's also user-friendly setup to get all those components organized so that someone at the district level can then enter it in. You'll be able at the district level to transfer the information by simply copying and pasting the responses from the template into the appropriate sections in GMAP. For anyone familiar with the template and GMAP platform from previous SIF applications, note that it might look different this round. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Ruth, and she's going to begin describing components of the application and highlighting some of the new components for those of you who've had a previous experience with this process.
Thank you, Veronica. So the activities that you plan to implement with these funds must be based on evidence that indicates that the practice or intervention is indeed effective. And if you've been involved with SIF in the past, you know that the evidence-based requirements have evolved over the years, and this year is no exception. And so with this cohort of money, the practices you choose to fund with this cohort of money must be based on evidence from the What Works Clearinghouse, or commonly referred to as WWC, that meets level 1, 2, or 3 evidence, which is also termed tier 1, 2, or 3 evidence within that platform as well. So we'll talk more about what that means a little bit later in the webinar, but we did want to point that out right from the beginning that we're looking for evidence from the What Works Clearinghouse. So we'll cover this more in depth in the upcoming slides, and just know also that the ER staff that's been assigned to your building, they will be prepared to further assist you in this whole evidence-based process as well. So the activities must also be included in your improvement plan or your CSIP, and that CSIP should also be then aligned with your needs. So think about your current CSIP that was submitted in January of this year. Remember, CSIPs are written as 3 to 5 year plans, and so it should be considered a living document that can be revised as needed. And so you may find as you're going through this process that you do indeed need to update your school improvement plan. And that's okay, and it's actually expected as part of this process. Think back, you also assessed your needs this year when you did your annual needs assessment process. And then you've also just recently received feedback from your 2-day review. And that review may have uncovered additional areas of need. So be thinking about what revisions may be needed to your school improvement plan. Specifically, I'm thinking about the TSI addendum that you found at the end of that CSIP template this year. And you likely, or you may have included a citation for an evidence-based practice. And if that particular citation did not come from What Works Clearinghouse, that may need to be something that gets added as you walk through this process for this particular funding stream. As with any improvement effort, and Veronica touched on this a little bit, but really this application should be a collaborative process that involves your school staff, maybe or including your school-based decision-making council, or some of you may have advisory leadership teams, and as well as district leaders. So make sure that you are kind of thinking about how is it that I'm going to gather this input from the stakeholders? What's our plan going to be to really make this a collaborative effort moving forward? So I'll go ahead and pause now and see if there's any questions that you may have about the general process or activities. And you can feel free to either add those in the chat or you can unmic and ask them.
What is the timeline?
Okay, if you'll hold on just till towards the end, we will definitely get to timelines in there. Appreciate the question, though. So we've discussed some of the general expectations. So now let's dive into more details about the actual application itself. Veronica mentioned the electronic template. And so that template really includes 3 core components of the application process. So first of all, you're going to outline the evidence-based initiatives that you are choosing to implement, and that's going to be done in a chart form. Then you're going to respond to some questions and some assurances about your process that you went through to determine these were the best evidence-based practices to implement. And then you're going to complete a detailed budget. So we'll take a look at each of those core components in a little bit deeper level. So on the screen, what you see is just the top part of that electronic template. And we just wanted to point out a couple of different areas on here. First of all, after entering the school and the principal's name, we do ask that you provide a total school enrollment. And so that number should be taken from your school's enrollment number for October 2nd of 2023. So this past fall's October date. And this number just allows the KDE staff who will be reviewing the application to really determine if the activities and the associated costs are reasonable given the size of your student population. So for example, if your school only has 180 students enrolled, we would not expect to see you wanting to purchase, let's say, 500 licenses of something or 300 Chromebooks. So that number just gives us a good kind of reference point to make sure that what's being asked for and what's going to be purchased is reasonable for your student population. You will also see that there's a spot where you are asked to put the total award amount. And we will be sharing those amounts later in the next coming days or weeks, but it will be in plenty of time for you to do your planning, so don't worry about that. But having that particular information up there just really helps remind everybody, school staff, district staff, KDE staff, that that is the number that should be fully allocated and budgeted within the application. So as I mentioned, just know that it will take us several days to finalize and notify you of those tentative amounts, but please don't let that stop you from beginning your process. You really want to be thinking about, how am I gathering input from everyone, start getting into that What Works clearinghouse and researching evidence. So you can certainly move forward before you do get that notification of your amount. So now we're going to take a closer look at those three core components of the application. The first is the school program details chart, and that's what you see on the screen. And so this is where you describe the evidence-based activities that you intend to implement. And then you're also listing the resources that you are going to need to purchase with these grant funds in order to address an improvement priority that was provided in your 2-day review report. So you can see that column 1 asks you to list an improvement priority or an IP. And you can see, and that should be taken straight from your 2-day review report. And so on the example, this one happened to be aligned to Standard 21, which was all about instructional expectations and practices. So right away as a reviewer, if I'm looking at this and I see this particular improvement priority, I know that I expect to see now resources and activities that are going to focus on instructional practices or instructional expectations. It also goes on to give a little bit more detail in an action statement that also was taken directly from that 2-day review report. And so that action statement provides additional detail about what the team saw as a need or needs during your visit. So it further outlines what the school should develop, implement, and monitor learner-centered practices. Also ensure high expectations for all students and provide professional development for staff. So again, that kind of gives me an idea of what my activities and my resources should be focused on. That comes directly from your 2-day review report. So that's column 1. In column 2, it asks you to list one evidence-based practice from that What Works clearinghouse resource that you chose that you're going to implement in order to address that improvement priority. So the example that's provided here happens to be from a practice guide from the What Works clearinghouse, and it's all about literacy recommendations for, I believe, K-5 students. And so knowing that we need to focus on instructional practices according to that improvement priority, the example states that this school is going to teach students to decode words, analyze word parts, and write and recognize words. So that's a recommendation taken directly from a What Works clearinghouse practice guide. And that's an activity that the school is going to do. In the third column then is where you want to list each resource that is going to be needed to be purchased if you're going to effectively implement that recommendation. So you'll see here that in order to implement that recommendation, this school is going to need an educational consultant to come and provide training. So one of their resources is a fee to pay for that consultant. They're also going to provide teacher stipends for the additional work that teachers are going to do outside the school day, outside their normal contract. And then they've also listed some specific instructional resources that they're going to need. They're going to need pocket charts and letter tiles in order to fully implement that recommendation from the practice guide. One thing I do want to point out is you'll notice that there's no cost information in this column. You want to save all that cost information for the budget. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that going forward, but just kind of keep that in mind. So then the last column is where you're asked to explain how or why each of those resources are needed. So in our example, it's stated that the educational consultant will provide 3 days of in-person training and ongoing support through virtual sessions. And the reason why this school needs to have this is to increase teacher knowledge of morphology and effective instruction in decoding. So that makes it very clear the purpose of that educational consultant. They've gone on to explain that teacher stipends are going to compensate the duties performed outside of the primary contract or the normal duty schedule. And they mentioned that this will include both training days, and then they're going to provide some stipends also for instructional planning days throughout the year. And then the last part mentions that the instructional resources are really needed to provide that instruction during small group instruction in decoding. So this really kind of lays out how all of this fits together. Here's the need that was found. Here's an evidence-based practice that has been shown effective. Here's what we need in order to implement that, and this is why or how it's going to be implemented. So I'll pause there to see if there are any questions before we move on.
Ruth, we had a question in the chat box related to the GMAP component earlier, but I'll repeat it for the group in case you don't have access. And so the question asks, would the GMAP application for cohort 6 already be showing up there? And the answer to that is no, it is not there just yet. So we're still working behind the scenes with the vendor on that application. And just as soon as it goes live, Ruth will alert everyone via email to let you know that that is ready for transferring information from that electronic template over into the official application in the planning system. So you shouldn't see anything there just yet, so don't be alarmed with that one, but we will certainly notify you just as soon as it's ready. And then Ruth, we had another question about whether or not we should utilize the WhatWorks Clearinghouse Standards Handbook 4.1. Do you want to address what that means for the clearinghouse?
Yeah, so that guidebook really is about, I think, how the WhatWorks Clearinghouse goes about approving or their criteria for the studies that they include in their references. So we're getting ready here to talk about evidence-based practices and WhatWorks Clearinghouse in particular, but what you're really looking for are the practice guides, the intervention reports, and the individual studies that come from the WhatWorks Clearinghouse. So as we go through this, if that didn't answer your question, let me know, and we can sure try to get a little bit additional information as well.
So we got a thumbs up, Ruth. So I think it's been addressed.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. So we're going to mention one more time within the application, evidence-based practices must be included. And so additional detail from the Code of Federal Regulations that was included in an updated non-regulatory guidance recently states that evidence-based practices supported with Section 1003 school improvement funds, which these are, must be based on strong, moderate, or promising evidence from the WhatWorks Clearinghouse that indicates a statistically significant effect on improving student outcomes or other relevant outcomes as defined by ESEA. So that strong, moderate, and promising is the same thing as level 1, level 2, or level 3, or you might also see it noted as tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So that's what we're looking for when you are researching within the WhatWorks Clearinghouse. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So this means that the initiatives you include in that application, in that evidence-based column on your template, must be based on one of the resources that you will find in the WhatWorks Clearinghouse. So I mentioned those briefly. A practice guide is a document where the WhatWorks Clearinghouse has gathered evidence and studies on kind of a broad topic. So I mentioned, for example, literacy for K-5 students. There's literacy for adolescents. There's strategies for English learners. So they take that broad category, they gather all the evidence that meets their criteria, and they summarize that evidence and provide certain recommendations based on that evidence. So some of the practice guides might have 3 or 4 or 5 different recommendations within there. As you're looking through there, it might make sense to choose one of those recommendations and that's it, and that's what you're focused on, it may make sense to choose a couple or a few of those different recommendations. So it just kind of depends on your context, and we'll talk a little bit more about that moving on. But know that a practice guide gathers all the evidence. It makes certain recommendations for things that are effective. Another type of resource in there is called an intervention report. An intervention report is, again, collected evidence that meets the What Works Clearinghouse criteria, but this time it's based on one particular intervention or program. And so in the intervention report, oftentimes these are branded programs, so something that you would have to purchase. Read 180 is an example of one. And so that intervention report would provide information about that particular program or intervention, and it would give you ideas about how you implement this. It also kind of includes some cost information in there. So it's based on something that you would purchase. Now, thinking about the practice guide that I mentioned, just because there's nothing mentioned in a practice guide to purchase doesn't mean that there aren't needs that you would have in your building that, hey, yes, we definitely would need to purchase X, Y, or Z in order to carry out that recommendation. So then the last type of resource from the What Works Clearinghouse is individual studies. And so the What Works Clearinghouse has reviewed individual studies on hundreds of different practices. And so this is what a lot of you may be more familiar with in terms of you've looked for evidence before. You may have gone out and looked for individual studies. And so What Works Clearinghouse has gathered, again, studies that meet their criteria, and they would have them reviewed in their clearinghouse, and you could use that evidence as well. So 3 different types of resources. It's completely up to you, which you choose to find your evidence-based practice from. And I'm guessing that most of you will want to really look through each of the different types of resources before you narrow anything down to a particular choice. I did see a question pop in the chat here. Yes, the slide deck, we can share this out. And those of you who received a specific email from me have the slideshow, and you are welcome to forward that on as well. That was the hope when they went out. So feel free to share, but we can also share it out to each of the schools who are involved again.
And Julie, we are also recording this, and we will share a recording to this webinar with everyone as well. So hopefully you can go back and re-listen to some of the sections as well as you're working on that application.
So I did want to mention that it's really important to keep in mind that when we're talking about this process of choosing an evidence-based practice to implement, it's really much more than just picking something from What Works Clearinghouse. Just because it's in there doesn't mean that it meets your need, that it's appropriate for your students and your context of what your school is. And so we really want you to be mindful of just best practice when it comes to evidence-based decision making. So best practice means that your decision is really based on a preponderance of evidence. It's just not one thing that you found and says this is effective, but you've looked multiple places and you've come to this decision. You really want to make sure that whatever you choose can really be implemented with fidelity. Do you have the staff, the schedule, the wherewithal to really implement the recommendation or the practice or the program the way it was intended to be implemented, because that's the way you get the results that were found in these studies. You also want to think about, so you're getting this money now, but can you afford to do this now with the grant as well as keep it going later on? So these grant funds hopefully will provide good startup cost, but you want to be thinking down the road once these funds are no longer available. You want to make sure that good work that has happened can continue on. So be thinking about that when you choose something. You want to make sure that it aligns with local values and context. If you're choosing something that your stakeholders are just really not going to care for, it's going to cause issues. You want to think about that. And definitely you want to think about, do you have adequate time for training and monitoring of these practices? In the past, we've had folks who include a lot of different practices, and it's really tough to fully implement each one of those and to truly monitor to see if it's making a difference. So really consider what you're choosing and the monitoring that will go on to make sure that it's being effective. And so again, this is really where your collaborative process comes in with your stakeholders. You really want their input when you're going about choosing your evidence-based practice that you're going to implement. So there is a compliance document then that gets completed for each of the interventions that you choose or the practices. We are going to go over that document here a little bit, but also just know that if you need additional information as we move along, that you can consult either one of our consultants, Natalie Guashiri or Veronica, who's here with us today, and also your educational recovery staff. They are very well versed in this as well. So here is the compliance document. And again, if you've been with us for SIF funds in the past, this will look familiar, but a little bit different. So this is specifically written for the What Works Clearinghouse. And so you'll see that at the top, you're asked to list that improvement priority that you're working towards. You are asked to provide a citation that provides full access to either a practice guide, an intervention report, or a single study from the What Works Clearinghouse. So when we say full access, we should be able to copy the citation you put there, plug it into a web browser, and we should be able to pull up that full practice guide or that full intervention report or that full study. Also, if you create it as a link, if we click on that link, we should be able to get to that full thing, not just a part of it, not just a summary. So be thinking about that when you put that actual citation there. And then we're also going to ask you to think about, we've already talked about that this needs to be aligned to your improvement plan. So we want you to actually list on here what specific goal area of your CSIP is this initiative going to be included. So is this practice really intended to improve your reading and math indicator? Or is this particular practice really intended to improve your EL progress indicator? Or maybe it's the achievement gap. So it can be focused on more than one goal area, but we do ask that you be really thoughtful about it. Don't just say, oh yeah, this will go for all of them. What are you really going for? What's that target? And which of those areas, which of those indicators do you really think that this is going to show improvement for? So be really thoughtful when you put that in there. So then once your team has done that hard work of researching and choosing what you're going to fund and implement from that What Works Clearinghouse template, then this is really going to kind of provide a roadmap for implementation and for evaluation. So we'll go through each of the definitions here for the different sections. So the first one is the project component. So that's where you're going to list that specific recommendation from your What Works Clearinghouse evidence. You also want to add a little bit more detail here. So who is it that's going to do this? So if I'm thinking about the example that we gave about teachers teaching decoding skills and morphology. So that might be all K-5 classroom teachers. So my project component might be that all K-5 classroom teachers are going to teach children to decode and the other things that I can't remember exactly what that recommendation said, but and they're going to make sure that they do this daily during small group instruction, or maybe it's weekly during rotations. So you really kind of want to think about what's this going to look like in practice. Then you're going to list those resources that you're going to purchase with the funds. So what resources are truly necessary to implement that chosen evidence-based practice? And we kind of like to use the term necessary and not just nice to have, because when we're talking federal funds, it does need to be something that's necessary. We really have to have this if we're going to be able to implement this recommendation well. And so kind of stay away from the nice to haves. We're looking for the necessary resources. Then when you get to strategies and activities, so here's where you're going to lay out. Here's what we're going to do with each of these resources. So if the educational consultant was one of our resources, here's where we can kind of lay out, okay, this person is going to provide 18 hours of training. We're going to have 6 of it during back to school time, and then 3 hours each quarter is going to be the virtual sessions that were mentioned. So what are you going to do with each of these resources? The other one, there was instructional resources. So we are going to ensure that every classroom has a set of these instructional resources in order to be used during small group instruction. So what are you doing with each of those resources? Then the outputs, this area tends to be a little bit difficult for people, and hopefully our definition is getting a little bit better at what we're looking for. So we're really looking for what evidence will there be that you've actually implemented the activities. So the educational consultant, for example, if I want to show that we have actually done that, we might have scheduled trainings. We might have a contract with our educational consultant. We might have teacher planning days where they're using what that consultant taught them. So that would be evidence that we've actually done that. With let's take the instructional resources. How would we know that we went about purchasing those and that they're in use? So we could have a purchase contract, but more than that, we could have an inventory of those resources. We could have walkthrough data that shows they're being used. So anything that's really going to show that we have actually done what we said we were going to do. And then the outcomes can be based on either students, staff, or just your system as a whole. What are you looking for to be improved through these activities? So student data is a given, and that's usually put on there as well, but you really want to think about what are you looking for in terms of staff? What are you hoping to see different and better or improved through your staff? Is it more use of the particular strategy, instructional strategy? Is it that these show up in their lesson plans? Is it, again, walkthrough data that you're going to look for? So really be thinking about what are we wanting to see improvements in just beyond that student data. And we always, when you're thinking student data too, we always want to be mindful of the different kinds of data that we might be looking for. And so then the last column is indeed that data. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about, okay, if this is what we're going to want to see, how are we going to measure it? What data do we have access to and is available to us to be able to show these improvements that we're looking for? I am going to reiterate that your ER staff and District 180 staff is ready to support you in completing, this process, the What Works Clearinghouse, documenting your evidence. And if you received the email about this webinar, there was a link to this particular document. And I will also mention that it is on the Evidence-Based Practices webpage, and you can find it there as well.
So before we move forward, what questions do you have for us about this WhatWorks compliance template? Any questions, any thoughts that you're having right now? This template or anything we've covered prior to this? Right then, Veronica, I will turn it back to you.
All right. Okay, so another important component of the application is core component number 2, which asks for elaboration on the school's processes and some assurances. So, as you all have heard a few times now, the funding for this grant must be backed by evidence based practices. So, it's really important to take a deep look into those improvement priorities for your school that you got from your 2-day review and research amongst the many practices to choose the one that will truly benefit your school the most. And of course, this is not only because you want these funds to lead to continuous school improvement, but because you're also required to document this process in the application. So that's going to be one of your assurances here, number one on the slide. Describe the processes used to determine the evidence based practices that will be funded and implemented. Include all databases and research reviewed and the method used to determine that the chosen practices will best meet the current needs of staff and students. So that's what Ruth was talking about, really delving in, making sure that what you're looking at fits the context for your school and so many other factors. After listing your processes for choosing those evidence based practices, you'll need to also provide the plan for monitoring, and Ruth touched on this as well, but how you're going to monitor the implementation of these practices. The template will include guiding questions to help schools fully plan a monitoring system for tracking implementation with both staff and student data. And a lot of times we do get wrapped up in that student performance data, but don't overlook the use of walkthrough tools, staff surveys, and other things to really gauge how that implementation is going. My computer is being a little slow. Sorry, guys. All right, so as a final note for the core component number 2 of the application, schools will be asked to agree to a set of assurances. And this slide lists those assurances that you must agree to within the application. And the school level applicants will check a box on the template acknowledging that you agree with those. Once the application is completed in that template and handed off to the district will check that same box in the GMAP application. So I'm going to give you all a moment here to just kind of read over these slides yourself and reflect. And if you have any questions at all, this is a good time to go ahead and come off mute or type those in the chat. And I'll give you all about 30 seconds to just kind of read over that yourself. I don't see anything popping up in the chat. So if you do think of any questions, just go ahead and put those in there. All right, so application core component number 3, the budget. This is where the money is. So we'd like to discuss this portion with you all. It is very important, obviously. And essentially, here the school's determining the cost of the activities and the necessary resources for the implementation. This is what it will look like on your template that you'll be filling out at the school level. So you will need to describe to KDE what you're purchasing, how many you'll need, how often, and at what rate of pay. All those things that we were talking about in that evidence-based practice compliance document. This is where you put the similar information, but broken down and detailed based on rates, how many teachers are registering for a conference, that sort of thing. The greater the detail here, the better. That's just going to increase the likelihood of your application getting approved quicker. And we do want to remind you all about that sustainability of what it is you're purchasing. So if you're purchasing something that's going to build capacity within your school, how can you ensure that those teachers are going to stay and that you're going to be using the training that they got is going to carry over in future years where you won't have this funding? How will you ensure that there's someone there to train new teachers on what they've learned when this funding has been expended? So you really want to think about how you can sustain those things. Also, investing your funds in activities that will get you the biggest return. So we encourage you to invest into anything that's going to translate into improved student outcomes. An example of an expense could be professional learning registration fees for 6 reading teachers at a rate of $625 per teacher. Remember, though, that the expense must be directly related to the evidence-based activity. Finally, the budget should not exceed the award amounts. And are there any questions that you all have about the budget process? Again, we've got plenty of opportunities for questions, so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Ruth. She's going to review some more of these district responsibilities that you will not see on the electronic template, but in GMAP.
Thank you, Veronica. So just as the school level is required to answer some questions and agree to assurances, the district level also has some questions to answer in GMAP. And this is really just to ensure that the district agrees with supporting the school through this grant and provides room for them to kind of discuss how they will do that. So again, because that template is the school information passed to the district, you won't see these in that template. These are going to be pre-populated, though, for the district in GMAP, and they are included on the next PowerPoint slides to allow you some time to kind of begin contemplating how you will respond. So I'll go over some of the details. So the School Improvement Regulation, which is 703 KAR 5280, it specifically states that districts with a school identified for TSI must monitor and provide support to the school to ensure the successful implementation of the school improvement plan. And then our regulation, KRS or statute KRS 16346, indicates that the local Board of Education must review and approve the revised school improvement plan for TSI schools. So that's the first question up there. It asks you to describe how the district really collaborated with the TSI school and the stakeholder groups to really develop and implement that CSIP, including that embedded TSI improvement plan. And you're asked to include in that description how the district ensured that the plan was informed by all indicators of the statewide accountability system. So their plan should have taken all those indicators into consideration and really, prioritized what they saw in there. It will ask you question number 2 to describe how the CSIP was developed based on the school's needs assessment. And then it will also ask you to describe the process used by the district and or the school to review resource allocations. And so the school should have outlined this in their TSI addendum, but as a district, you want to be sure that you're understanding what are their resource needs. Are there any allocations or different ways that resources need to be used or allocated to them? So you're asked to list the types of resources that were reviewed. You're asked to list any resource inequities that were identified. So were there any areas that were found to be, this could be a cause of our EL students not performing like as we would like? Is there some way that we need to use our resources differently? Same thing if your targeted subgroup is special education, is there anything you found out about staffing or scheduling or resources that need to be looked at differently in terms of resource allocation? That's one of the things that this SIF application should be really geared towards, is addressing any of those resource inequities. So if a school was found to have a lack of rigorous and updated materials for their particular subgroup, and those materials can be aligned to an evidence-based practice, that might be something that you could use these funds for to address that inequity in there. And then you're asked to describe how the district can go about aligning other federal, state, and local resources as needed to help carry out the activities supported with these funds and to address any other resource inequities. So is there a way that you can look at how you allocate your federal, state, and local funds to this particular school to help them out in implementing these evidence-based practices if additional funds are needed? Number 4 asks you to describe how the district supported the selection of evidence-based interventions. And so remember, collaborative process, and district personnel should be involved. It doesn't say that district personnel should be doing the deciding, but you definitely want to be involved in that process and make sure that you're a part of it. And then number 5 asks you to describe how the CSIP was approved by the school and district prior to submission to KDE. So what did that process look like from the time the school created it? Did they work with different district personnel? And then how was it then approved by the local Board of Education as well? So the district will also describe their monitoring process. So it asks you to include in there, how will the district monitor the progress of the schools receiving these funds or services? And we want you to be specific. Are there going to be monthly meetings about this? Is there something that the school is going to be asked to present on a regular basis? How is it that you're really going to monitor whether or not these things are actually being implemented? You want to talk about, again, that timeline. Periodically isn't really a timeline, so you kind of want to think about, is this monthly? Is this weekly? Is it going to happen on the first of every month, the first leadership meeting of every month? So think about being specific. And then you really want to think about, what actions will the district take if the school is not being successful? So specifically, what are some things that from the district level that you plan to do if you see that things are not being implemented well or are not being effective? Number 2 asks you to describe the rigorous review process that was used to recruit, screen, select, and evaluate any contractors, vendors, or other external partners with whom the district will work. So if you think about it, we talked about educational consultants. So that would be an outside vendor. So how did you go about recruiting this person, screening them, and making sure that they are indeed a good person to provide the training that you're going to get? If it is a vendor of a electronic platform, let's say, what kind of research besides, the What Works Clearinghouse did you do to determine this is a good person to purchase this from? So be thinking about what that process looks like at the district level. Number 3 asks you to describe how the district will work with the identified school to see if there's any modifications that need to be made to the practices and the policies that are in place that would allow them any kind of needed flexibility as they go through this process. So we really want to try and remove as many barriers as we can to allow these schools to implement what they need to see the increases in their subgroups that they need to be able to see. And then number 4 asks you to describe the district's plan to really assist the TSI school in sustaining those proposed initiatives once the grant funds have been depleted. So you may, have federal funds that you would be willing to look at once you see that this practice is effective. So be thinking about, what are you going to do to assist them in sustaining these as they move forward? So there are staff at the district level who have specific knowledge that will be important and helpful in this application process. So if you're on here as a federal program coordinator, you know that SIF funds are subject to Title I Part A requirements. And so you have that specific knowledge and experience with those. So that means that you need to adhere to things like time and effort, like inventory of purchases, record keeping, and all that. So if you're a federal programs coordinator, you want to be thinking about these SIF funds being similar to Title I in those requirements. Also, as I think Veronica mentioned earlier on, these funds are subject to monitoring. And so we do go through and select a certain percentage of applications for each cohort that do get monitored. So thinking about that, make sure that you're keeping all your documentation and you have that. So then it's easy if you happen to be tapped for monitoring. If you are on here as a finance officer for your district, we really encourage you to ensure that expenditures align to district policies and guidelines. And we're really asking you to do this both prior to submission so that they're not, planning on something that you're going to end up vetoing later down the road, and then during implementation to make sure that when the expenditures are actually made, that they align to district policy and guidelines. And then also remember that these funds must be expended by September 30th of 2026, and there will be no carryover waivers. So we really want you as finance officers to ensure that funds are drawn down consistently. We really don't like to have you wait until the last few months and then draw all that money down. So kind of think about what's your plan to make sure that these are drawn down on a consistent basis.
All right, thank you, Ruth. So I want to chat with you a little bit about allowability and then also share some information regarding some expenditures and our process for determining award amounts for this particular grant. So these funds, Section 1003 or 1003, you'll hear us say it a variety of ways. They can be used for any activity that you determine as the school and that KDE agrees will help the school identify for TSI to improve student outcomes. And of course, as Ruth and Veronica have shared, everything must be aligned to something from the WhatWorks Clearinghouse. So we're thinking over the years, some of the things that have come through our office that could be interventions aimed at improving the school, it could be professional development, tutoring opportunities, a combination of those activities. And anything, again, that is supported with these funds must be necessary to implement that chosen WhatWorks Clearinghouse evidence-based practice, and then of course consistent with your needs assessment as well as that CSIP as well. And so all expenditures under this SIF program for the millionth time must be supported by something from the WhatWorks Clearinghouse. So again, that could be professional development, that could be human capital. So if you feel based on what you find in the WhatWorks Clearinghouse, you need someone at your school to provide ongoing interventions. You can use these funds for staffing purposes. You can also use these funds to purchase instructional programs, technology to support any of those interventions that you find. Of course, parent, family, and even community engagement activities that are directly tied back to that WhatWorks Clearinghouse. And then any necessary materials and supplies that you feel as a school are necessary to help you with that implementation. We do ask that when determining what expenditures you plan to purchase, that you consider your local context. And so you need to have those hard conversations about whether or not you can replicate the practice that you find in the WhatWorks Clearinghouse. If you have the staff to help you carry out those initiatives, if you have the ability and a means to hire needed staff. So if this requires someone else to help you to be employed by the district, but you're having a difficult time recruiting or even retaining staff. So keep those sorts of things in mind as you're going through your planning process. And please remember to connect everything back to that WhatWorks Clearinghouse practice that is selected. Ruth mentioned this early on, and we'll reiterate it here again, that all expenditures under this SIF grant must adhere to those same RAND requirements that are under Title I Part A. And actually, we haven't been very clear about this up until this point, but school improvement funds are a subset of Title I Part A funds. Okay, so that's the reason why we're reiterating this and that these funds are so strict to those requirements. And so RAND stands for reasonable, allocable, necessary, and documented. And essentially, this practice ensures that the federal funds are spent responsibly. So before you put something in that grant application, please take the time to ask yourself whether or not the purchase is appropriate in cost, or is it reasonable? Is it allocable under the program's intent? Would it be something essentially that KDE would allow? Is it essential or necessary for carrying out that evidence-based practice? And ask yourself whether or not you can readily document the reasonability, the allocability, and the necessity of that purchase. So we'll throw out another example here. So if you select an evidence-based practice and to implement it, it would impact 60 students directly in your school. It would require them to have 100 iPads. And while those devices may be a documented need in your school's CSIP to carry out that evidence-based practice, it would not be reasonable to buy 40 extra devices. So to meet the RAND requirements, the school would need to reduce the number of devices in order to meet that RAND test. So just some common sense things here, but wanted you to keep that in mind as you're working through that electronic template and planning those purchases. To further help you out with allowability, we do offer a non-competitive federal funding matrix. So this grant is not competitive. It's a formula-based grant. And so we have hyperlinked for you in your PowerPoint slides that federal funding matrix. And basically that document lists all of the allowable munis codes for the SIP program. And we ask that when you review that resource that you look for the column that's labeled ESSA Section 1003 School Improvement, and not the one that's labeled NCLB School Improvement. The school improvement throws everyone off there, but we're looking at the one that's labeled with ESSA. So this program is governed by the Every Student Succeeds Act and not the No Child Left Behind Act, or NCLB. So please make sure that you're accessing that latest version when you're writing your grant. But we did want to make you aware that within that electronic template and even in GMAP, we tried our best to only include the allowable codes, but there's so many we may have overlooked one. So just be careful there and do some cross-referencing as you're working through the budget portion of your application. Okay, so along the way, we've shared with you many requirements associated with this application. So I just kind of want to summarize here all of those required components of the application. So alongside the application itself that is officially in GMAP, we also need the following items uploaded. We need your CSIP, the WhatWorks Clearinghouse compliance requirements document that Ruth went through earlier, and then also the signed principal assurance. And that's the last page of the electronic template. It looks just like what you're seeing here on the screen underneath where it says principal assurance. So this is different than the button that or the checkbox that you'll fill in on that electronic template. This is actually a place where a signature is captured. And so a district level staff person will need to upload a PDF copy or a picture of this page with the signed signature. So those are the core supporting documentations or documents that we need in addition to the contents of the application as we're working through our review. So we did want to reiterate here that you have plenty of time to get all these things aligned and get them taken care of to support that application. And I'll talk to you a little bit here shortly about the timeline and what you can expect there as far as due dates and things of that nature. So let me pause here to see if you have any questions before I dive into any of the other components and kind of summarize everything up. I've said a lot. Any questions that are coming to mind?
I see Stephanie has her hand raised. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I have a question regarding, I know that you guys said the funding is coming forthcoming, but it's May, and I know our last SBDM meeting is coming up around June 3rd. So will we know between now and June 3rd our amount so that we can start consulting with them, or will we just be consulting at the beginning of next year? Because I'm not exactly sure of when the deadline for the submission is. You guys might not have gotten to it yet, but I'm trying to schedule in all those pieces because it is required for us to consult with them.
Yes, it is. So thank you for bringing that up. And yes, you will have a tentative amount. So we will share that within the next couple of days. You can expect that hopefully next week or the week thereafter so that you can have that ahead of your SBDM council meeting. So that's a great question. Others that you all have for us before we move forward? Okay, so just to sum it up here really quickly, so you need to complete the electronic template as the school. So you'll complete that electronic template. You'll budget all those awarded funds that we'll make you aware of. The principal assurance will get signed. Again, that's the last page in that application. And then you will pass everything off to someone at the district level. So there'll have to be some orchestrating there on who that primary contact will be for this, that point person. And so the district contact will upload the application contents. That's just merely copying and pasting from that electronic template into GMAP. And then, of course, the district will need to answer its respective questions. And then once all those steps have been taken, everything's uploaded into the system, the district will hit the magic submission button in GMAP, and then we will be notified via email that it's been submitted. And we ask that you give us a few weeks to process that application here at KDE. So it'll take us a few weeks to work our way through each of those. So I think this is our third or fourth time sharing this today. We're not prepared to share the exact award amounts with you. However, again, we are going to send you that tentative amount to help you with planning purposes. And I wanted to share with you kind of the behind the scenes process that we use here to determine how much goes to each of the schools. And so we award funds on an equitable basis. And so it is based on a per pupil amount that we determine here at KDE. And then we multiply that dollar amount by the total growth factor for your school. Okay, so it's based on a growth factor number for your school, and that's how we determine the particular allocation. And so, again, we're going to share a tentative amount with you, but that may differ a little bit. Once we get closer to the application going live, we'll keep everyone posted on this. But if it differs a little bit, either up or down, please know that we will share a final amount with you via email. And then also those final amounts will be pre-populated into the GMAP application as well. So we'll keep everyone alert of everything, but please know that we're going to share a tentative amount with you to begin your planning process with the grant funds. And so Ruth shared this. The initial award is going to be available to you this July 2024, and you have to have those funds spent or obligated by September 30th of 2026. So we're going to give you an initial award, and we're going to give you a continuation award. Okay, and so continuation awards will come to you in July of 2025, and then that continuation award you will have until September 30th of 2027 to spend or obligate those funds. Okay, so you will spend or obligate the continuation award by September 30th of 2027. So I want to address a couple things here. So you're probably wondering, well, when are we going to know our continuation award amount? So next year, around this same time, we will reconnect with each of you, either email or a quick webinar, and basically share with you what you can expect with the continuation awards and then what that process will be. I will share with you, it will not be as taxing as what you're doing here initially. We will likely ask you to just complete a budget and then send in any updated documentation that aligns to those budgets, okay? And I've already gotten this question from some of you asking, well, what if we exit TSI status this fall? Will we still be eligible for the continuation award? And the answer is yes. It is based on your current status. Okay, so you'll get an initial award and then you will receive a continuation award. But just kind of put a pin in that one and hold on it until we chat with you again around this time next year to get you poised and ready for that continuation award. I see a question in the chat box about growth factor and whether or not that can be clarified. So growth factor is a number that is reported to KDE by each of the districts, so related to your schools, and it considers a lot of things. It's more than enrollment. It considers attendance, absences, race and gender counts. What else is on there? Adjustments for partial day students. So it gives us a total picture of the school. So that's the number that we use for this formula, and is generally used for a lot of formulas here at KDE. Other questions that you have before I move us forward? Okay, so here's some timelines and deadlines. We made it to this slide. So we are asking that the templates content, so everything that gets put on that electronic template and even those accompanying documents, that they are entered into the GMAP system by July 1st, 2024. So everything will likely open up to you, and it will open up to you even sooner than that, but we're asking that everything get submitted in that system by July 1st. So when it does become available, when it is open in GMAP, early submissions are welcome. So the faster you get to work on this and start organizing and aligning everything and doing your research in the WhatWorks Clearinghouse, the better as far as expending those funds is concerned. If you find yourself in a position where you're not going to quite make it by July 1, reach out to me, Ruth, or Veronica, and we can help you out behind the scenes with that. But we hope that you can have it in there for the timely spending of all those funds. And just the same with this grant as with all the others, you cannot spend any of the funds until your application is formally approved in GMAP, and then the official award notification has been posted on KDE's website. And there again is the obligation date of September 30th, 2026 for this first round of funding. All right, I'll turn it over to Veronica.
All right. We know that has been a lot of information. Thank you all for holding on with us. Here's just a summary of some of the things we've gone over. All of your expenditures must be aligned to those evidence-based practices from WhatWorks Clearinghouse and the levels or tiers of 1, 2, or 3 only. We need alignment with your CSIP, and it is okay to modify or change that up. That's how the CSIP works. Remember the collaborative effort that we want here. We don't want just a principal working on this their entire month of June. Get that input from your school staff, the SBDM, your leadership teams, the districts. Also remember that the application must be reviewed and approved by KDE before any of those funds can be drawn down, and also after the award notice is posted. Remember that this is a school grant at the school level. It is a time-sensitive grant. It's going to be subject to opens records request, and it's subject to monitoring. Some next steps for you all. Depending on the level or layer of the application that you're responsible for, here's some of the things that you all could get started on right away. Also, at the end of this webinar, which is right around the corner for you, we're going to be giving you a link to a training verification form so we can take roster of who's been in attendance today. So please make sure to hang out and fill that out once that link comes in the chat here at the end. So for schools, you can get started with reviewing your 2-day reports, those improvement priorities, the needs assessment, and the CSIP to determine what it is that you're going to be looking for evidence-based practices in the WhatWorks Clearinghouse to be funded by this grant. you can go ahead and begin reviewing the What Works Clearinghouse website and just clicking around on there to try and get to know it a little bit better. And also looking at that and studying the electronic template. For the district level, we're asking you all to establish a process and communicate it with the TSI principals and staff. You know, who's going to be that liaison, who's going to be the person that they can really lean into with the connection of getting everything in GMAP. And we also are going to have some office hours for you all. Please know that we're here to support you all through this entire process. And if you would like to drop in on some office hours, here's some dates that we are offering them. We will be sending out calendar invites to all of you for those, so you can accept all of them and then just jump into the ones that you end up needing. It's however you want it to be. It's just going to be pop in as needed basis. So some will be in the morning, some will be in the afternoon, and it can be whatever works for your schedule there. We really appreciate you all taking the time to hop on this webinar with us today. Here you'll see our emails listed on the screen. Please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. Also, the presentation and other materials have been sent out to your emails. We've got this webinar recording, so it'll be available for review later. We really look forward to getting these funds to your schools and appreciate your all's dedication to continuous improvement. So you're welcome to hang on if you have any other questions. We're about to drop that link to the training verification link for you, or training verification form for you all in the chat. So make sure you do click that and get that filled out. But if you'd like to come off mute and ask any questions or ask them in the chat, you can feel free to do that. And thank you all so much.